All right, so React component lifecycle, that's what we're gonna be talking about today. So to start, we're gonna talk about the human lifecycle. We have conception, that's a biology 101 topic. Birth is when we're actually coming to this world, and we might say hello world. Then we go through aging. So aging is, we usually celebrate birthdays every year, but we're continually growing and updating, I guess, in that sense. And finally, we have death. So ultimately, we will pass away, and that'll be, hopefully, we'll all rest in peace. All right, so these are the human life cycle stages. Very similar to that, we have React component lifecycle methods. So conception will be the idea of a component being created by a parent component. Then we have birth. So this is where the component is actually rendered to the screen for the first time and added to the DOM. Then we would have aging. So aging is a little less, I guess, concrete with a component. Component kind of waits on the parent to update its props that's being passed on to the component, or internal states might be updated by the user interacting with the UI. So that's a sense of aging for a component, for a React component. And then we have death. So React components also go through a death, and that would be when the component is actually removed from the DOM. All right, so again, very similar lifecycle stages for humans and components alike. Let's talk about lifecycle component methods. So during the lifecycle of the component, we can actually interact with the component and kind of do updates or do whatever logic we need to do. So post-conception, we can do items or do logic in our constructor. Again, this is assuming we're using a class-based component. If we're using functional-based, there's a different way to kind of handle it, but currently we're talking about class-based components. So a class will have a constructor, and this is where you initialize items. We'll talk more in detail about the constructor. Post-birth, so this is after the initial render. There's a method called component did mount that will trigger. This will be called by React, and again, we could do specific logic in here as needed after the very first render of our component. All right, and then we have post-aging, or more accurately, post-updating. React will call component did update. So again, these are preset methods. You can't just create any method and kind of have React call it. React is expecting these methods to exist if you want to do particular updates or any sort of logic in these stages. So again, after an update, component did update will get called by React, and whatever logic you want to do in there, you could just put in there. And then pre-death, so right before the component is going to die, we have another method that can be called. It's called component will unmount. All right, so these are 3, or I guess 4 of the main methods that's used within the React component lifecycle. Again, this is assuming you're using a class-based component. So let's talk about these more in detail. So this is a nice diagram to kind of visualize the flow of a component lifecycle. I'm a very visual person, so this kind of helps me kind of understand what's going on. So let's actually look at the 3 main stages. So mounting, when component's being mounted, we call the constructor, or actually we don't call it, but the constructor automatically gets called. And this is where we might have, again, initialization logic or some other items that might need to be done before the initial render. All right, so after the constructor is called, we will, when I say we, React will call render. So render will do the first rendering and add the item to the DOM. And then after the initial render is done, we're going to call component did mount. So again, component did mount is going to be called by React automatically after the first render. So that's the process of mounting a component. All right, and then we have updating. So updating is the majority of the life for a component. When it exists, it might need to update based on various factors. So one is if the parent passes down new props, we will trigger a render because those props might change the output of our component. Likewise, if we call set state, so this is an internal change, like let's say a user clicks a button and we have a state that relies on that button, we're going to call set state, and then set state will trigger a render or a re-render for our component. A third way that a render can be triggered is by calling force update. This is a manual way to kind of just force a render to happen. I don't have a good use case for when this be necessary, but again, if if your props don't change and your state doesn't change, but you still want the re-render for whatever reason, you could manually call force update, and that will trigger a re-render. All right, so these three cases can cause an update. We'll render, and then once that render completes, component did update will get called by React. And then here is where we might do additional logic as needed. All right, so that's updating. Again, updating can happen several times, multiple times throughout the existence of a component. So basically, updates will happen over and over. Eventually, a component will be removed from the DOM. So this is where component will unmount will be called right before your component is actually removed from the DOM. And that's pretty straightforward. It's just one method, nothing really else has to be done in that process. Okay, so again, this is a pretty cool diagram. This is actually linked from the React official React docs, but it's on some personal page. I'm not sure who this person is, but if I kind of want to go to that web page and kind of look at this diagram a little more closely. All right, so this is the diagram that we were just looking at. So this person created this project where you can actually click on these methods and it'll take you to the docs. So if I click on component did mount, it will take me to the official React docs and it'll tell me all about component did mount. So that's pretty nice. So you could just probably search for React lifecycle methods diagram and it should result in this page. Let's actually check that out. So it's React components lifecycle diagram. Hopefully should be the first result. Yeah, you should get the first result. It's projects.wojtechmod.pl. So it's kind of an odd URL, but this is actually where it links to. All right, so if you want to kind of investigate, I can click on Constructor. Again, it'll take me to the documentation, and you can read more in depth about what the constructor does and kind of how it operates and what you want to use it for. So great resource there. But yeah, so this is the basic diagram that we went over, but that's not actually the whole story. So if I click Show Less Common Lifecycles, there's actually a few more methods that are involved in the entire process. So it is kind of complicated. The additional methods aren't used that much, so that's why we only focus on these three functions. Component did mount, component did update, and component will unmount will be your most used component lifecycle methods. But if you want to kind of just look at the additional ones, again, you can just click on them. They'll take you to documentation and give you more insight into what these methods might be used for. So we're not going to really focus too much on the least or the lesser used methods. Again, we're going to be focusing on the three main ones, which are did mount, did update, and will unmount. All right, so before I proceed, any questions so far about the lifecycle methods, how they're used, what they're used for? Again, we will talk more about the three main ones, what they're used for. All right, sounds like you guys are on the same page. So yeah, let's proceed with our diagram. Let go. All right, so yeah, so it's a nice visual representation of the lifecycle. And let's talk about the particular stages in the lifecycle a little more in detail. So we have mounting. So mounting goes through a few steps. It's going to call the constructor first. So this is where the props will be passed. And this is a class-based component that we're talking about. So the constructor will be called. After that, there's that lesser used lifecycle method called get derived state from props. This is a static method. So if you guys kind of recall what static means in the case of a class, this means it's not tied to a particular instance. This will apply to all instances that get created for your class. After get derived state from props, we will call render, and render again will do just the creation of elements and will get pushed to the DOM. And then after that initial render, component did mount will get called. All right, so those are the four steps in order of what happens when a component can be mounted. Okay, so I'm just going to use some Lion King GIFs to kind of convey the message because Lion King, great movie. So mounting is the idea of, a component gets I guess, conceived and then get to birth. So that's where it is introduced to the DOM. So the constructor, as we mentioned, is the first point where the mounting logic calls. So this is where you want to initialize state. So state, again, is our internal data. That's a good place to initialize it. And then also there's an idea of binding event handlers to the instance. And you guys might be kind of wondering, what am I talking about? So this is definitely something, if we've not gone over before, it's important to know, because it's likely that you guys will run into this issue if you've not run into it already. So the idea of binding to the instance is basically binding the keyword of this. So we've talked about the this keyword before. It kind of gives you access to the instance of the class, but you have to actually manually bind it in certain cases for it to work as you would expect. So in JavaScript, the this keyword actually refers to the object that's calling your method, not where your method is housed. So you might have a function or a method within a class that's defined in a class, but if someone outside of your class is actually calling that method, the this keyword is not going to refer to the class. It's going to refer to the caller. And that's an important concept to keep in mind. It's not always intuitive, but again, you will encounter this if you are not binding your event handlers. And we'll talk about other remedies for getting around this. All right, and the last thing about constructors is that you should not cause side effects. Side effects are basically any other updates that might be triggered from what you're doing with your current logic. So inside your constructor, you should not be calling set state. The constructor is one of the few places, or I think the only place, where you should be calling this.state and updating this.state directly. You do not and should not be calling set state in your constructor. Any questions about the constructor, what it's used for? Hopefully you guys are with me. All right, but I kind of want to focus on this binding concept because, again, I'm not sure if we went over it directly. If we did, then this will be a good review. If not, definitely good to know about. So let's bring up a coding window. All right, so I've created a React app already, so we don't have to wait those awkward 60 seconds while all the files are downloading. So I'm going to actually start my React app. I've not coded anything in here yet, so this is just going to be our default React app. Let's kick that off. All right, so it seems like I've already used my port 3000, so I should definitely find out who's using my port. I believe I have another VS Code kind of running in the background. So to get around that, I'm actually going to update my port that I'm going to use. So I'm going to my package.json, to scripts and the start value. I'm going to type in port, let's make that 7777. All right, let's save that. And then I'm going to quit this. So I believe if I had clicked yes there, React would just give me like a different port number, probably 3001, but I wanted to specify my own. So that is what I did just now. I'm going to use another desktop. Okay, so this is our default React app. Again, I've not added any code. This is just what comes out of the box. So let's actually add some code. Going to my app.js. And all right, so we have a functional component here, but we want to show class-based component behavior. So I'm actually going to create a class-based component right here. So converting this to a class-based component, again, instead of using a function, I'm going to type in class. My class will be named app. That's going to extend something called components. Component is coming from React, so I'm going to have to import that, else it will complain that it doesn't know what I'm talking about. All right, so class app again can be named whatever I want. In this case, I'm going to keep it as that. Extends component, and then I got to add a render method. So render, if I type it correctly, that will return whatever I want to return. Looks like I lost a div. Okay, so again, converting to a class-based method, you simply replace the function with class. You have to extend the component class from React, and then you need to add a render method. All right, looks like I'm missing a curly brace though. All right. Hopefully I did everything right, and if so, we should see hello world in our browser. So let's see if that works. I'm gonna refresh here. All right, there we go. We got hello world. So it seems like we successfully converted our function-based component to a class-based component. Okay, so here I wanted to kind of show off the constructor. So that's what I'm going to add here. I'm going to add a constructor. So the constructor takes in props. And for your constructor, you always want to call your base. So you want to pass the props down to your base, and that should be the first thing that you do. Taking a step back, this generally goes for any class method that you're calling. When you have a derived class, in this case, we have a derived class called app, which is deriving from a component. Again, this holds true for just any class-based design in Python or JavaScript or whatever language you're working on. Almost always, you want to call the base class with the parameters that the base class takes in. So there are exceptions to this. If you know for sure that you don't want to call the base class, as in you don't want the base class to do certain logic, then you might circumvent or not even call the base class and do whatever logic you want. But as a rule of thumb, always call the base class, and the exception should be not calling the base class if you know that you don't want to do whatever the base class is doing. So this is where it goes back to reading documentation. Again, documentation, reading is not that fun usually, but it's just part of the job. But you gotta understand what the base is doing and then kind of react off of that. All right, so in this case, we're just passing props down to our base class, and it's gonna do certain things with our props. I don't actually know what it does with the props, but you have to call it in order for things to run smoothly. All right, so that's the first thing I do in my constructor. Then I can initialize my state. So I could do this.state and initialize some values. So let's say my value, and we'll set that equal to 55. All right, and then I'm going to do that. All right. And then another thing we can do here is binding methods. So we'll actually see what that looks like. But let's actually see what not binding a method gets us into. So I'm going to add a few elements to my page. Bear with me. So let's add an input. Type will be text. And let's add a button. All right, so we don't really have anything exciting going on here. We're going to give this button some functionality. So we're going to add an onClick handler, and this will link to some handler. So in our class, let's create a handler. I'll call this uncreatively handle click or handle submit. And then this will do something for us. So let's just display an alert. And we'll say, hello, November. All right, so basically when we click this button, it should just show us an alert. And then let's say I want, actually, let me do something different. Let's print out our values. I'm going to do this.state.myValue. And I got to add my handler, so it's going to be this.handle submit. I forgot to put this on there. All right, so hopefully you guys kind of understand what's going on here. If not, definitely please ask me questions. But basically, I have an input that's not being used right now. My button has an onClick handler that's going to call handle submit when the user clicks the button. And handle submit, all that is going to do is print out the current value of my state. So my state is initialized to 55. So I would assume if I click this button on my page, it should print an alert with the value of 55. Okay, so let's actually give this a run. And I'm going to use the VS Code debugger. Right now, I don't want a breakpoint. I'm going to save this. Again, just to go over running through the VS Code debugger. Hopefully, you guys are pros at this. If not, just want to make sure you guys kind of understand how to go about it. So I'm going to go to my debug tab and then create a launch.json file. So I click that link, and then it's going to ask me where I want to actually open it up. So I'm going to select Chrome. And then it's going to generate a launch file for me. The only thing I need to change is the port. So this port has to match where your React server is running. So in this case, my port that I specified was 7777. So I'm just going to save that, save the changes. And then I'm going to go to my run menu and hit start debug. So hopefully everything's good. Yep, it should pop up and open Chrome page. So let me move this to a new window. All right, so I have my input, which I'm not using right now, and the submit button. So I'm actually going to hit submit. Again, if we coded everything correctly, we should get an alert that shows the current value. And the value was initialized to 55. So we should see 55 in a pop-up box. I'm going to click this. All right, we got an error. So again, errors are common with React. Again, it's definitely can be sensitive. You mistype something, initialize something, you can run into errors. So let's actually look at this error and see what it's trying to tell us. So I got a type error, cannot read properties state of undefined. And it's pointing me to line 15. I see I have state. I'm calling state off of this, so this.state. So this is going to tell me that my this value is actually undefined in this case. And that might be kind of confusing because I'm looking at this code and everything looks like it should be working correctly. Like I would assume this should point to this class. And this class definitely has a state value because I initialized that in my constructor. So I'm actually kind of wondering what's going on here. And this is where binding comes into play. So again, we just to go over that notion one more time, in JavaScript, the this keyword actually refers to the object that's calling your method, not where your method is defined. So I actually don't know where this method is being called from. It's maybe somewhere in React or the browser or somewhere. I'm actually not sure. But all that matters is I'm not getting the correct this value. So if I try actually debugging this, click this button again. So let's go back. Click this button. I can actually investigate what I'm dealing with. So if I hover over my this value, again, I do see it's undefined. And that's not what I expected. So there are a couple ways to remedy this issue. Apologies there. One way is to bind your methods in your constructor. So to do that, I'm going to add, so basically I'm going to reassign my handle submit. So to do that, I'm going to do handle submit, this dot handle submit is going to equal this dot handle submit dot bind. So bind is a predefined method. And I'm going to pass it this. Okay, so this looks definitely kind of strange. Let's kind of talk about what this is doing. So this dot handle submit is my original function. I'm calling bind, which is actually going to create a new function for me. And it's going to bind this keyword to that new function. All right, so again, a lot of thises in this line, on line 12. This is a parameter that I'm passing into the bind method. In my constructor, this is going to refer to my class, because that's just how the constructor is kind of structured. So this is going to actually point to my app class, or the instance of my app class. That's going to be passed to the bind method. The bind method is going to create a new function and make the value that I passed in the actual value of this whenever handle submit is going to be called. And then this line here that I've highlighted is going to actually create a new function and assign that to my handle submit method. All right, so if I restart my project here. All right, so with line 12 added, let's see what happens. So I'm going to click my button, and it's going to go to my breakpoint. Let's actually investigate my this value. So I'm going to hover over this, and notice that I actually have values in here. I have, it's again, a lot of information here. Let me try blowing this up a little bit. Like this has apps in it. There's a lot of properties in here. Half of them I don't even know, but notice that I can see my state here. My state, if I expand it, my value is equal to 55. And this is what I expected, because that's what I initialized in my constructor. So everything looks to be working okay now. And the magic was this line right here, line 12, where we actually bind this value, the value of this, to that method. So anytime this method is going to be called, the value of this is always going to point to the instance. Any questions on all of that? It's definitely confusing. It's definitely not intuitive. It's just something you got to know about in JavaScript.
I have
There's a question in the chat.
question in the chat. Let me quickly find that. Where's handle submit defined? So handle submit, I've created it on line 15. So that's a definition of handle submit. In JavaScript, there's something called hoisting, so I can actually refer to handle submit before it's created.
Will it make a difference if you define handle submit inside the constructor?
Defined handle submit. So
like if you delete line 12 and put handle submit inside the constructor, would that work then?
So like this?
Yes.
I don't think this will work because handle submit will only have the scope of the constructor. So no one's going to be able to actually call this function because only the constructor would be able to call this function because this function exists in the constructor.
Oh, I'm sorry. I mean, if you put handle submit in the state, is that something that you can do?
Like this?
Like another prop in the dis.state dictionary.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. That's a good suggestion, actually. So handle submit, and then that would be something like this.
Yes. Would that work?
Yeah, that would work. So we do have to pass like a, okay. Let's try it. I'm actually not sure. So we have handle submit in our state, and then I'm going to comment this out. And then this would be this.state handle submit like that.
Yes. I think you have an extra bracelet on line 14.
Gotcha. Line 14. Yes. All right, cool. Yeah, let's try this. I'm curious. So
it might invoke the alert right away.
Yep, that is actually what happens. I got this pop-up right away. Yeah, so that is not quite what we wanted, but that was definitely a good idea. Again, I wasn't quite sure what that'd do. So yeah, if we refresh, breakpoint.
But if you sign that handle submit to an anonymous function that calls the alert, that might work.
Gotcha. Yeah, so I think what Tom's suggesting, if we do something like this, so this is actually going to create a new function. Let's see if that works. All right. Yep, that totally works. So we'll talk about why anonymous functions kind of are a saving grace here. But I just wanted to go through the manual method of actually binding a function. So great suggestion there, Christian. That is, I guess, one way you alleviate this binding issue. But I'm going to back out our changes here. And so, yep, I'm going to put my bind back in. All right, so as I said, line 12 is where we actually bind this keyword to our handle submit. And that makes it so that this keyword is going to actually be what we want it to whenever handle submit is called. By whoever calls it, this keyword would point to the current instance, not the caller of the object. All right, so that's one way we could alleviate this problem. Another way, again, kind of we just went through it, is using anonymous functions. So if I didn't want to go through this, again, I might have a lot of methods I've created. I might not want to go through each method and bind it manually. Again, it's not that much work, but it's just not really something I'd want to do. One easy way you can get around that is by creating an anonymous function. So in this case, I'm going to change my handle submit to be a fat arrow function. Again, fat arrow functions and anonymous functions are synonymous. They're just different ways to say the same thing. So in this case, I'm going to be creating a function, an anonymous function, and then assigning it to handle submit each time. So if I do it this way, and again, I haven't changed anything in my onClick, let's see what happens. So I'm going to put a breakpoint in my handle submit. Restart. All right, stop this. All right, I have my breakpoint there. Okay, there's my web page. Let me move this off screen. All right, so if I click submit, I'm in my handle submit, and notice again, we did not bind manually. We just created an anonymous function. If I hover over this, again, it is the value that I want. This is all the data. There is state. State my value equals 55. So this is exactly what I want. If I continue, it does pop up an alert with 55 in it. Okay, so the easy way, if you just don't want to deal with binding and think about binding, I guess you could always just kind of fall back to creating anonymous functions. So this would just make your life way easier. So if you're not using fat arrow functions already, this is just another reason to start using fat arrow functions.
Where does the alert come from again? I'm sorry.
Oh, the alert is just line 16. That's just a built-in method for your browser. So if you call it alert, it's going to actually create that pop-up for you. So when I click the button, the onClick is handled by handle submit. Handle submit will be called, and I execute the alert there.
I have a question about line 23.
Line 23. Yep.
Why is the capital submit there?
Right here? Oh,
Why is that?
This is just the value that's shown on the button. So if I put donuts here. And
Okay.
Yep. So it's the value, sorry. Now it's called donuts. Yeah, so that's just the visual text that the user will see on the page. So you can make that whatever. It doesn't have to match, it doesn't have to match your handler or anything in particular. That's totally left up to you. You can leave it blank if you want, just have a blank button. I don't know what that would look like. I guess the button's super tiny. I guess it didn't size because there's no text in it, but there is a button there if you guys can kind of squint your eyes. So I click this little tiny sliver, and that still does the same thing. But usually you want to have text, so I'm just going to put my submit back in there. Any other questions about this code or the idea of binding, or in general what a constructor should be used for?
Do you have a short definition for what bind does?
I actually don't know the particulars of it. I just know that it's going to map this keyword to whatever you pass in. So if we wanted to maybe see if there's documentation on binds, what's going on here? Now let's look JavaScript binds. Let's see what we find. All right, function prototype binds. So as I said, the bind method creates a new function when called, it's this keyword set to the provided value. So again, I don't know what's going on under the hood, but again, just a high level, whatever you pass in, it'll map that to the this keyword. So when we pass in, again, when we pass in this keyword to the bind method, the this currently is pointing to the instance of this app that's being created. And that's going to be mapped to this keyword that's used in the handle submit function. So this is kind of overriding the default functionality. If you don't do this line, then this keyword in your handler is going to point to the object that's calling your method. And that object might not be an app instance. Again, I don't know behind the scenes.
Hey, Ankur?
Yep.
Yeah, so the bind, this keyword actually, it actually defaults to the window object. So when you call bind, this actually is, you're binding this to the instance of the object that you're using it on. So like you're pretty much changing the reference of the this keyword.
So you're saying this here is the window object?
This done handle submit. Yeah, you're binding this keyword, the one you're highlighting right now, to the new instance, which is your object that you're creating, or the class, or the component, excuse me.
Okay, sorry, you lost me with that a little bit, but so yeah, what did I get wrong there? So this keyword we're binding, but so this I was saying is the instance that you've created. Is that not correct?
Oh no, that's correct.
Okay.
I was just saying for the references of this keyword, that it does initially default to the window object, and when you're calling bind under the hood, you're changing that reference to whatever component you're using on. So if you like console log this, it'll change it.
Gotcha. Okay, so sorry, if I could ask you another question. So if I don't bind it, can I ask, do you happen to know why on line 16, why this is undefined rather than pointing to a window object?
Yeah, I'm not really too sure, but I know that when you use it arrow function or a fat arrow function, it changes the scope of this keyword. I don't really know like under the hood what's actually happening with that, but yeah, I'm just not like really too versed with like class-based components, but I was having issues with it.
Okay, yeah, so yeah, I'm not, yeah, again, I don't know why this is undefined in the case where you don't bind it. Like if it is the window object, like it should be something, but yeah, I'm not sure about that. But when you create an anonymous function, just the way anonymous functions behave, it's going to take the current scope of where the function is being defined. So we're actually creating a function here, and it's going to take the current scope, which is the app context. So that's why this would automatically default to the app instance when you use anonymous functions. All right, so a lot of technical details there. Long and short of it, if you don't want to worry about too much of the technical details of bind and what's going on behind the scenes, just use fat arrow functions is the key takeaway here. So with all that said, yeah, try to use fat arrow functions. They'll save you a lot of headaches potentially with this keyword. The one drawback that is worth mentioning, fat arrow functions do have somewhat of a performance hit. It's probably not going to be noticeable. It's going to be negligible with what we're creating, but it is could be potentially a performance issue if you are constantly creating a bunch of fat arrow functions and you're really concerned about performance. So that is one drawback to using anonymous functions kind of over and over, because every time we call hand submit, it's going to create a new function. Or yeah, sorry, every instance is going to create a new function.
Can I ask just a random question? How come you guys decided to do your examples and use class-based instead of functional-based? Why is that your preference? Is it because you want to show a little more detail? Because from my experience with functional versus class-based, I feel and even Charles had pointed out to me too that it saves you a little bit of space and it looks a little cleaner. But I mean, I just wanted to know your opinion on it.
Gotcha. No, totally a fair question. So in this particular case, the reason I've started out with class-based components is because the lifecycle methods that we went over, all of these are only specific to class-based components. The component did mount, component did update, component will mount. These are methods that will be called throughout the lifecycle, and again, only class-based components. When you get into functional components, these don't exist. Again, these methods won't exist. So we actually had to do something different. And worry not, we are going to go over what a functional component would have to do to kind of simulate these methods. But yeah, it's kind of, I think it's a little easier to understand from a class-based perspective, just going through this flow and understanding what methods are being called. Again, the functional approach is a little less, I guess, direct, but it can achieve the same exact thing.
Gotcha. Perfect.
Yeah, usually, I would say if I were personally coding, I usually just default to functional-based components, just because I've been told that's the newer way, or I guess the trend is going towards more functional-based components. So I'd rather be doing where we're headed rather than what the current or the past standard was. But yeah, so we will show both again, because we're currently, I guess, in a React world where class-based components are the norm, but functional-based components are the trend. So good to see both in that case.
Gotcha. Yeah, I didn't know these were specific to class-based components. So that clears it a lot for me. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, no, thanks for your question. Okay, so we went over the constructor, definitely spent some time in there. The last thing I want to talk about for the constructor, in case there was a question about it. So it is recommended that you initialize your state values in your constructor, but you don't really have to do this. I can actually take this line, line 9 through 11, and just do that in directly here. So I could do state equals whatever I had before. All right, so this is totally fine. So long as, if your state values don't depend on your props, then you could initialize your states to whatever your initial values need to be. The only reason you might need state, again, in your class is if it relies on props somehow. But that's another.
I was gonna say, yeah, and you don't always need the constructor function.
Yep, yeah, so if I'm not gonna do any binding here, and all my state values are initialized and don't depend on props, yeah, this is optional. At that point, there's a default constructor that's created, and that default constructor, all that's going to do for you is this logic. It's going to call the base. But again, if you don't provide a constructor, there's just think of an invisible constructor that gets created, and we'll just simply call the base class for you. If you do provide a constructor, this means you're overriding the default constructor, and at that point you have to do the logic. So in that case, you do have to call the base, and then you can do whatever you want in that case. Yep.
Does the default constructor bring in props, or it does not?
It does. It will pass in props and call the base.
Does it benefit us at all to manually put it in? Like, can we like change it to the point where, you know, like the default wouldn't, you know, like, could we, I don't know, detail it or make it, you know, cater towards us in a different way versus, you know, having the default, you know, like the default way?
Sorry, I kind of
Yeah, I was trying to explain it.
so again, just
Does it benefit us like to manually put it in so that we can do something specific with it versus having it, you know, just default to something, to some props or something?
Yep, exactly what you just said is the reason to create a constructor. If you want to do something extra or do something, you know, special that the default constructor is not doing, then you will create your own constructor that will override the default one. So the default one will no longer be called or even exist. It might exist, sorry, but if you create your own, it's going to call your constructor and do what you specify. If you don't have anything special to do, then you just leave it off, and the default constructor will do what it does by default.
And we can put other things in besides props, right?
No. So here you're saying if you want to pass something in.
Yeah, like, because I feel like if we're just going to pass in props, then it doesn't really make a difference. But if we were going to pass in something different, or if we were going to use it in a different way, then okay, I can see why, you know, we would manually put it in.
So with normal classes, like if you're just creating a class in JavaScript, then yeah, you could control what you're passing in here. So if I want to, you know, pass in something in other, again, since this is my own class, I could pass in whatever values I want to my constructor when I create the class, and that will totally work fine. But since this is a component, component is relying on props being passed. Again, if we go back to when I guess I don't have a component here, but you know, if I had a component, I could pass on properties to my child component, and all of those are going to be bundled into a props object. So you can't really have additional values here and actually use them meaningfully. Yeah, so in this case, something is not going to be very useful for you. I mean, you can still have it. It's just going to be undefined when this component is being created.
So just to clarify, so in this case, we don't really need to manually put it in, right? Because if we weren't to put it in, it would still give us the same results, correct?
Yes. If I understand your question correctly, yes.
Yeah, like, so if we don't necessarily need that constructor right there because we're just passing in props, right?
Yep. If you don't have the constructor, everything will work just fine for you.
Okay.
You only need to add a constructor if you need to do additional things. And those two additional things, just to review, is if you need to update your initial state values based on whatever properties are being passed down from your parent component, or if you want to manually bind the functions in your class. Otherwise, if you don't need to do those two things, you can leave off the constructor and you'll be just fine.
Hey, Ankur, is that the constructor function? Is that the same as like in a functional component when you just pass props as like an argument into the functional component itself?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. That's again, yeah, class-based components. The props are passed to the constructor. For functional based components, it's just passed to the function. But it's the same props value behaves exactly the same. All right, so that was a lot of talk on the constructor, but kind of good to get familiar with the constructor if you need to use it. All right, but let's move on. All right, so then we get to our first lifecycle method, which is component did mount. So again, this is something we briefly introduced with new site 3. This is, excuse me, this is where you can initialize your state values that relies on the DOM. So usually your state values are probably independent of the DOM, where you just have like my value equals 55. But let's say, for example, you wanted to have a state value that measured like the actual physical size on screen of like your button. Like, let's say I wanted to store the width of this button inside a local state value. If I want to do that, well, I need for the initial render to happen so that the DOM actually has this button, and then I can actually physically, you know, get the width or height or whatever, like the text off this button, and then store that into my state values. So I can't do that in my constructor because the DOM hasn't been rendered with the elements that I need. All right, so that's one reason you might add logic to your component did mount. Also, this is where the docs say to make your initial API calls. Again, if we go at, this is, again, as I said, or going back to reading documentation, not always the funnest thing, but this is the best practice. You can theoretically have your API calls in your constructor, but that is A, not what's recommended, and 2, can cause problems. So once the DOM is ready, that's where we can make our initial API calls after that. I'm gonna say, if you are curious why that's recommended, hit the Googles. I did do some research. I didn't get a clear answer, but it's just best practice to do your API calls here instead of elsewhere. One note here is you can call set state after your initial mount, and that will trigger a re-render. But according to the docs, that will not actually create a screen refresh. So if we actually want to try this out, just to verify it, if they're lying to us or not, let's actually try this out. So my value is initially going to be 55. And let's say after my initial render, so I'm going to add a method called component did mount. Again, this has to be named exactly this. I can't say component, just mounted like that. That's not going to work because React is actually going to look for this function and call this function. All right, so component did mount, and let's change my value to be, let's see, my value is going to be 77. All right, so initially it's going to be set to 55, then it's going to be set to 77, and then let's actually show this value somewhere. So let's add a simple paragraph element, and this will show this dot state dot my value. But we need our curly braces. Okay, so if the docs are correct, I hope docs aren't lying to us. I should never see 55 in my window, even though 55 is my initial value, and it's going to render first with 55. Then it's going to call component did mount, at which point I call set state and change my value to 77. And then there'll be another render that will update my value to be 77, and then that's going to be output the screen. So let's actually try this. I'm going to get rid of my alert because that's just really annoying. I guess I'm not going to click the button, but all right. So let's just refresh my page and let's see what I see. So, all right. So I hit refresh and notice that I see 77. Now, hopefully it's not a caching issue. So let's, I don't know if we need to change these values, but let's make it 88 and 99. If I save, it's going to update, isn't it? Yeah. So again, I don't think these pages are being cached, but like when I go to this, it always shows me 99. I don't see like a momentary 88 that changes to a 99. I guess 8 and 9 are kind of easy to confuse. I don't know what's different than 9. Let's say, no, not 4s. Let's say 2s. But yeah, I refresh, like I don't even see like a flicker here yet. I just see 99. So again, the docs say that you can call set state in your component did mount. So again, component did mount gets triggered after your initial render, but set state will cause a re-render, and that re-render will actually be what's output the screen. So your initial render will not actually have a momentary screen presence. So that's just something useful to know. Kind of, again, you don't want your user to see like flickering websites or something that shows momentarily and kind of gets replaced. So that's kind of nice that React, kind of handles that for you, where you can call set state and it'll actually use a new state right away.
Question, does functional use effect kind of behave the same way, where you don't get that flicker if you use effect?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that's something we definitely should test out. I don't have a yes or no answer for you. So as always, it doesn't hurt to test. So when we get to our functional based components, definitely something worthwhile testing. So remind me if I forget about that, but it's a great question. All right, so sorry, let's go back to our slides. That is component did mount. Again, this is where you can do additional logic once your initial render has happened. And then making initial API calls, again, this is the place to do it if you are making API calls. All right, so then we're gonna get to updating, but before we get to updating, let's take a quick break. So we were going at it for probably over 45 minutes. So let's take let's see, what time do I have? It's 10:21. Let's take a 9-minute break and be back by 9:30, and we're gonna talk about updating. And that's where we can see Symbug growing in front of our eyes. And all right, so we talked about mounting. So that's where a component is initially created and then rendered to the DOM initially. and then handling anything after the initial render with component did mount. Now let's talk about updating in the lifecycle in our component lifecycle. So for updating, there's, I guess, 5 methods that are called. The first is create derived states from props. So this one is not often used. Again, this is a static method. This will be called if you do have states that rely on props, those will be updated. The next one that's called is should component update. So should component update is actually past the, I guess, the future props and state values. So that's the values that are changing and are going to be set to your current state and prop values. So you can actually investigate your current props and compare it against the next props and next state values and see if you actually want to render something. And then this can dictate if the render actually goes through or if we abort the re-render. If we do choose continue, we'll call render. And then after render, there's a method called get snapshot before update. I've never used this method. Again, these are lesser used methods, but this allows you to do some additional logic from what I read in the docs that lets you like capture scroll position on your window so that you can reset the correct scroll position. Again, I've never done this, but it is possible, and there might be other uses for this function, but I'll leave it for you guys to read the docs if you guys are curious. And then finally, this is our second most often, or second useful component lifecycle method that we're going to be using often is component did update. Again, this method is called after re-render happens from an update. So not from the initial render, but from all future renders, component did update will get called. And this will get passed automatically the previous props and the previous state values. And additionally, some snapshot value that comes from get snapshot before update. So this usually would be null unless you do actually implement your get snapshot and return something that you need from there. All right, so let's talk about the particulars. So going back to our diagram, if I could find that in my window. Looks like I've lost it, so let's do a quick Google search. So it was React component lifecycle diagram. Should be the first results. There we are. Okay, so if I show less common lifecycle methods, that's where we could actually see the should component update. So this actually can control whether we actually proceed to our render or abort it, which is the X condition here. So yeah, again, this is, I guess, your last chance to determine if a render should happen or not happen. So let's talk about this function. Again, you usually won't be using this, but it can be helpful in certain cases. So it's a pretty simple function to understand conceptually. If you return true from it, it's basically going to say, all right, I should continue with my render, and it's actually going to proceed to do the rendering. If you implement this function and return false from it, it's going to actually abort the render. And the whole reason this function exists is because it's generally going to be cheaper for you to compare values yourself, whatever it be your states or your props, than for React to kind of create this rendering on the virtual DOM and trying to figure out like what differences there are to see if it actually needs to render something to the screen. So apologies. Yeah, so again, this kind of just saves you processing time or performance. Basically, it's easier for you to determine if the rendering needs to change rather than for React to do it. Again, React can totally do it, but it's going to be more expensive in most cases. All right, so that should component update. Again, this isn't an often used lifecycle method, but it does exist, so you can employ it should you find a need for it. But let's actually get to our second, I guess, second of 3 main functions that we want to highlight. This is component did update. So this is where you respond to any changes in the DOM. So like if the user has any input and they update an internal state value from it, then we want to maybe do something additional after that. So one common use case might be to make more API calls. For example, if we, if we had like, let's go back to our Hangman example where we hit start new game. When we start a new game, we're going to make an API call to that random word generator API and get a new word for us. So this is where we would handle it in a class-based component. We'd make an API call and then wait for that result to come back, and then that would trigger a re-render. You can call state in component did update, but you have to be mindful of that because keep in mind, Components automatically re-render anytime state or props change. So if you call set state in component did update, that's going to cause another re-render. And that render is going to lead to another call to component did update. So if you're not conditionally checking your state and just calling set state repeatedly, maybe with like a new value, it's going to just loop forever and forever. So make sure if you do call set state that you are conditionally checking it so that you're not doing the same thing over and over. So again, if you're setting the state to the same value, it's not going to continue to re-render because it's going to know that nothing's really changed. But let's say you had like a random value. For example, if your API is returning a random word and you're calling set state in this function with that new word, each time the API calls set state, it's going to trigger or re-render and then make another API call and just go over and over and over. And then you're going to be stuck in a loop. All right, so that's component did update. Again, if we go back to our nice diagram, that's happened after a render from an update. Again, an update can happen if props change. Again, this is what your parent component is passing down to you, or if your internal state changes, or if you choose to call force update. One thing to kind of mention also is if you call force update, it's going to circumvent your should update component. Because obviously, if you're manually forcing an update, you're probably not going to need to check if you need to update, right? So that's just going to automatically jump from get derived state from props to render. But all of these cases that trigger an update will eventually lead to a call to component did update. So that's your updating case. Again, kind of a lot going on here, a few methods that get called, but the main one you want to focus on is component did update. Alrighty, so any questions on updating? I thought it might be useful to kind of see an example of should component update. So let me try coding that up and we can maybe see why it can be useful. So let's add that method. Should component update, VS Code knows what I'm trying to type here. All right, so in this case, as we talked about, if this method returns true, which is the default case, it's going to proceed with a render. But if we return false, like for whatever reason we know we don't need to re-render, then this will be the place where we do that. So let me create a condition or a scenario where this might actually happen. So bear with me as I add more code. I'm going to create a new component. So let's drop that in a components folder. This will be called, output.js. I'm going to use a snippet just to save time. So I've created a VS Code snippet that will create a class-based component for me with a few clicks, and then I'll name this output. All right, so this is my class-based component. Let's add something here. So put an h1 tag. And inside here, we're going to render this render values. Okay, so I'm going to create a method called render values. And this will investigate this state.myValues and do something with that. So I need to create a state value for that. So state equals, again, if there's any questions about what I'm doing here, again, hopefully you guys are familiar with just the idea of creating a component, adding some methods and state values. So this would be my values, and that's going to be an empty array. Okay, I'm not going to create a constructor here because I don't need to do anything with initialization or anything else for now. Let's see. Actually, I lied. I will need a constructor in this case. Apologies. So constructor will take in props, and that we will call our base class. Again, always remember to do that. I think React will throw up an error if you do not call super or call the base class manually. So I guess it kind of will point you to the error if you forget it. In this case, I want to call this .state and initialize that my values to props. Okay, so basically I'm going to pass on values from the parent. I'm actually going to sort it and store that in my values. And this will make sense, hopefully, when I get to it. So in this case, I don't need my initial state here. So I'm doing a constructor. All right, so I have my values in my state, and then I'm going to use my values here. So for that, I'm going to, let's see, for value in what do I want to do here? Let's create elements. And then here, elements will basically store some elements. So these, let's just make these divs, or let's make it h spans. Okay, and this will simply take in the value. All right, so I'm just gonna populate my elements with a bunch of span elements, and then that's gonna be what I'm gonna render from this method. So I'm gonna return elements. One thing, if you guys remember, you guys should be using a key value if you're just generating a list of items. So in this case, how do I get the index? Does anyone remember offhand? With index? I'll just do it the other way. All right, so in this case, I'll have an index equals 0, I less than this, my values dot length, and all right, so in this case, my key will be I, and my value will be in here. All right, any questions? So basically, I'm just going to have some values and then show them in an h1 tag with a span. So they should be listed in the same row. Let's see. Let's add a space. Break space. Okay. So I think I got what I want. I might need to make some changes, but let's just kind of see what output the screen. So for my app, I'm going to use that output component that I just created. So I'm going to import output from ./components/output. All right, and now I should have access to output here. So let's break line and output here. Output, and this is going to take in some values. So I think values is the name of the props that I created, and that should take in this .state.values. Okay, I got that going. I should probably add a state called values. Will be empty list, and okay. So this is going to be in my output. All right, so I'm moving the should component update to my output, and we'll add some logic there. Okay, you guys following along? Sorry if I kind of coded too quickly or lost you. But basically, I just created a new component that's going to just show some values. All right, so that value, I guess, is going to be an array, and that array eventually should have some values in it. Maybe I should have named it a little different than values because I'm saying values way too often. But okay, so the user should be able to enter some values. So I'm going to use a ref. We haven't talked about the ref attribute. This is something that can kind of just make it easier to capture values. If you go back to last week, there was a case where I wanted to have the value that the user types into an input and capture it like in a React way. One way to do that is just constantly update the value that's being mapped to the input. And as the user types, you constantly update the input. That's not always ideal, because if that input is being passed as a prop to another component, that component's going to try to update each time like the user is typing in words. And if you only care about the end output and not as they're typing, you might not want to do it that way. So one way to get around that is using a ref. So let's just say input value, and that's going to be create ref. So again, this is a built-in method that I'm going to have to import. So create ref. And if you're confused about refs, don't worry. It's just a way to kind of keep values that aren't states. So states, again, if states change, they'll force a re-render. Refs won't trigger a re-render if they change. So input value will be my ref here. And input value will be, all right, so this ref attribute, I can pass in the ref I just created. So that's this dot input value. I'm going to put that into here. It's that input value. And now I don't have to track as user types in values. I could just reference my input value when I actually want to know what value is in there. So to do that, my handle submit will do this dot input value dot current. Okay. Current. All right, so this will actually point to that input element. And then this has a value on it. So I'm going to get that out of here. All right, so this should capture whatever value is sitting in the input control whenever the button is clicked, right? Because the button gets clicked, it calls handle submit. Handle submit will get the value out of that control and store it in a local variable. And then I'm going to call set state and update my values from that. All right, so let's say value dot split on commas. What I want to do? Yeah, split on commas. Okay, so basically, I'm assuming that the user is going to enter a comma separated list without spaces. Again, I probably should error check if this was an actual, website, but in this case, I know what I'm going to enter. It's going to be a comma separated value list, and then I'm going to convert that to an array using the split method. And that's going to be stored to my set state. I forgot my curly braces here. Okay, so if you guys have been following along, I know I've added a fair amount of code. Basically, you click a button, it's going to grab the input. It's going to use that input, convert it to an array, and store that inside our internal state, which is values. That, in turn, is going to trigger a rendering update on output. Because output, we're passing values as a prop here, and then output where we render. So let's actually check this out. So I have strict component update. Let's just have, let's have a breakpoint here, return true. Okay, let's see if this all works. Again, incremental testing would probably be best here. So most likely I have some error in here. Let's see what happens. Elements is not defined. Okay. Got my let's do that. Render values is not defined. Line 27. Output values. Where is it talking about? Render values.
That render values.
Gotcha, thank you. Okay, hopefully those are all the errors. All right, cool. So ignore my value 99. We're not using that anymore, but I'm going to enter some values in here, and then hopefully you should get an output here. So let's add like apples and mangoes, and let's not keep it plural. We have apple, mango, and let's just have banana. Let's hit submit. Got an error. That's cool. Okay, so it looks like my ref is not quite established correctly. Let's quickly fix that. So this was on line 19. I'm using this .state my values, but that should be, where is it? Handle submit, cannot read current. Oh, I forgot my state. I would make these typos. Okay, so where is that? Where is that? Right here. So this should be this .state, because again, my input value is in my state. So let's save that. Hopefully that remedies it. So we had what? Apple, mango, and banana. Okay, hit submit. All right, let's debug and see what happens. All right, good. Let's do Apple. All right, this is good. State looks good. Input value looks good, but current is null. Why would current be null?
that what it's just initializing as when the text box is empty?
No, it shouldn't be because I'm clicking a button and then this should exist. So let's actually
Does value.split need to be in quotation?
value.split this.
No, like the whole thing. I don't know. Never mind.
Maybe, but yeah, the issue right now is this current value is null. Not what I expect. Interesting. Sorry, let me quickly go through a debugging session here. Oh, of course, I forgot my state down here. I don't know why I always just leave off state. Something that I need to work on. All right, so let's continue and run this, blah, blah. Okay, so hopefully if this is correct, let me try this again one more time. Fingers crossed, mango and banana. Mango and banana. There we go, submit. All right, so everything nothing's breaking, but I was expecting my output to show apple, mango, and banana. Let's see what's going on here. Those render values actually get called. Submit values, props. This all looks to be good.
You don't need to use state for render values.
Right here, no. This is a method that I've defined. So in that case, I don't need state. Let's try this again. Apple, submit. Nothing's doing. That's not hooked up correctly. So I have my render return. Oh, I'm not even running my debugger. That's what I need. There we go. Render values. Okay, nothing in there. Render values, nothing in there. Okay. Okay, so now we've got our web page up. Let me move this to a new window so I don't forget. All right, let's type in Apple, submit. Okay, so we actually got here. The value is input. Okay, looks like we finally got where our value was, which is Apple. Goes and splits it. Okay, so finally doing what I want. Apologies for their issue there. Let's take out some of these breakpoints. That still doesn't render it. All right, so elements. What is all thing? Nothing. Okay. So sorry, I'm going to get a little too into the weeds here, but I think this is where I need to use my other function that I kind of introduced, but didn't really talk about. Get derived states. The reason being is because my state, again, directly is derived from my props, so that's why I need to use it. So, okay, so let's try returning something here. So this is going to return. Example. Yeah, I need to return from here. Get derived. That'd be a good example in here. Okay, so I got to return. All right. So I just need to return this. My values. Did I lose anyone with what's going wrong? Give that a try and see how it's. Nope. That's not the thing. Okay, let's try this one more time. Submit. All right, so I got some output, obviously not what I expected. So just to review, I'm sorry if I'm throwing too much new items at you. Basically, the way my values is defined is that I'm basically taking my props and sorting it. So I don't really have anything I could update my values to. That's solely reliant on props. That's where this magic function that we sort of introduced but never actually got too much in detail comes into play. So anytime that the props that are passed on to the component change, this method will get called, and then we could update our internal state as needed. So in this case, since my values are mapped from the props, I need to use it in this function. So this will return the new state that I will use. If you read the docs, they recommend strongly not to create a state that's related to our props, but sometimes you do need to do it. So this is how you would handle it. Again, read the docs. They have workarounds for it, or I guess other better suggestions if you're doing cases where you need to rely on props. But again, if you need to, it's not the end of the world to do it. So I'm putting out this state values because I didn't wrap this in curly braces. Save that. Okay, there we go. Got apple. So let's add some values here: mango and banana. Okay, notice that this is alphabetically sorted. Mango. This is alphabetically sorted, all right? Because that's what we're doing in our output. We're taking in some values, sorting them, and then displaying them. So the whole reason I wanted to do this, and was probably not worth the time effort, but what if I change the order here? Like, what if I put mango first? Mango, and then I do apple. So notice that my props will change. The props that I pass down will change because I reordered this, right? My array will be in a different order, and it's going to be a different array. But my values are still going to be apple, banana, and mango in this order when I want to print them out. So this is a very specific case where my props changed, but my output does not need to change. And I should again, for performance reasons, circumvent this the re-render that's going to happen, because I know, again, that I'm going to sort it. It's going to be the same value. And then I can just prevent the render from happening and kind of save some performance there. Again, performance isn't a huge concern from what we're doing, but it's just kind of, the whole point of this was to highlight shared component update. So let's just, kind of quickly wrap this up. So in this case, shared component update can check, if we go back to our docs, shared component update. Let's read about that. So should component update gets next props, next state. So that's something I definitely want to take advantage of. And then I can investigate, let's say, this state my values and compare that against next state my values. And since this is an array, I'm just going to stringify these values. All right, so if these are equal, then I know that I don't need to re-render. Again, we've sorted our array, and then we've compared like the string form of that array. If those are equal, then we know we don't have to do this render. So in this case, we're going to return false. False. Any questions on the madness that I've kind of introduced here? All right, so I'm comparing my current values with the new values that are about to be applied. And then if those match, I'm going to return false. Otherwise, I'll return true. So let's actually put a breakpoint here and see this in action. So let me restart this. All right, my breakpoint is active. Ideally, if I type in apple, mango, banana, and then switch it to mango, apple, banana, I should hit this breakpoint because I don't want to re-render because my output's going to be exactly the same. Let's test this out. So I have apple, mango, banana, submit. My values. What went wrong here? State is not defined there. I was curious. What's that state not done? This is good. State. Good. All right. What's going on here? So refresh. I guess I could just check if state exists. Oh, next state is not defined here. So next state and check this. Okay, let's try that again. Hopefully. All right, next state has values. State's not defined. Oh, I don't need that state here. Will that clean up my error? All right, hopefully that's kosher now. All right. Whoa. Okay, let's try that again. Go. Okay, I might run into an error again, but let's just try with apple. All right, apple works, and then let's try apple, mango, banana, as we had before. Okay, we got our output. So now, if everything works correctly, if I switch my ordering here, so my props will change. If I change it to mango, apple, banana, but my output does not need to change, so I should hit this breakpoint. So let me hit submit. And there we go. So I'm in should component update. I'm inspecting my next state, comparing it with my current state. And since those are equal for my needs, I know that I don't need to re-render this because the output's going to be exactly the same. The rendering is going to do nothing for me. So I'm just going to kind of save React from having to do the render and then compare it and to see if it actually needs to update the screen. All right, so that was, again, kind of a lengthy example. Apologies for that tangent, but kind of wanted to show where should component update might come into play. All right, and then component did update. Again, this is where you can make new API calls based on your initial state changing or your initial update of your render. Any questions on all that I did? Sorry if I lost people along the way. But yeah, what questions do you guys have about should component update or component did update? All right, so let's add component did mount, just to see that in action. I'm just gonna print out to the console. So I'll do console.log. And we'll do did mount. And then in our component did update, I'm just gonna print out did update. And then finally, I'll have, this is our last method that we're potentially gonna use a lot. So the component will unmount. So again, this will happen when this is about to be removed from the DOM. So we'll say will unmount. All right, so again, let's continue on our slides. So last thing is unmounting. Again, sad time in the movie where Mufasa passed away, but again, we will one day reach our point where we're going to have to unmount from this plan, I guess, and React components are no different. So when they're unmounting, the only method that gets called is component will unmount. So if we go back to our diagram, if I still have that up. Yep, so unmounting, pretty straightforward. It's going to call this method. You can do whatever you need to do before the component is removed, and then that's basically your last will and testament you'll do in this method. All right, so component will unmount. The main purpose of this is so you could clean up any resources or anything else that you're using that doesn't need to exist anymore. So a common example are timers. If you set a timer for your web page, let's say you want your web page to kind of like automatically query an API every 5 seconds. Well, that's great. You're going to have that timer running. But if your component is no longer going to exist, that timer doesn't need to keep running every 5 seconds, right? So this is the function or the method which will kind of handle all your cleanup duties. Any questions about component will unmount? So again, this will get called right before it's going to be removed from the DOM. All right, so with these items in place, let's actually see how these are being called. Let's maybe add some conditional rendering here. If I do something like render output, without typos, hopefully. I'll put this into a function, give me my this, which I always forget. All right, so we have render output. Let's see, let's make this conditional based on say values. So we'll do this dot state dot values dot length. If that is less than 4, I guess, we'll show output, else we'll show nothing. So this is where I'm using a ternary. Question mark case will be handled if this is true. And then if our values exceeds 4, I guess we'll just show too many items for whatever reason. Okay, let's give this a try, see what happens. Okay, so let me kill this. And I'll run this hopefully. Okay, so my value is not being used. Let me just get that out of our way so we don't use by it. See you later. Okay, so we just have this input and submit. So if I type in apple and mango and banana, great, I got my output. Let's look at my console. So I'm gonna bring up my console here. So notice I have a did mount. So let me refresh the page. Probably better. Okay, so I'm gonna refresh my page and I want my info. Yeah, all right, so I got did mount. So this is where my output component just mounted. So I got a did mount. So now let's do like something that will update the state. So again, I'm going to pass this prop down to my output component, and that's going to trigger an update. So if I hit submit, notice I got a did update. So if I add like mango, I got another update. So notice the 2 that was put next to it because I guess they condensed all these outputs. So I got a did update a second time. Let's add banana. Right, so I got another update. Notice I got a 3 in my output window for did update. Let's do that case where I switch these items, but again, my output shouldn't change. So if I hit submit, notice that my did update did not trigger or did not get called. The reason being is because I handled this in our should component update and we said false as in we don't want to render. And since that render did not happen, our component did update did not get called. All right, let's try to add a 4th value. So what's another good fruit? Pineapple. Hit submit. Okay, notice that we're showing too many items. We actually unmounted our output component. So if I go back to my code, we're conditionally rendering our output here. So if our input value of fruits or whatever we're inputting is greater than 4, we're actually gonna not show the output anymore. We're gonna show a paragraph element. So our output actually got unmounted in this case because it did exist before. Then we added a 4th value and then hit submit. And then the rendering said, okay, we don't need to show output. It's actually going to unmount it. and that's why the will unmount is shown here. All right, any questions on anything we've gone over? Again, kind of can be a little technical. The main takeaway is just understand when these methods get called and why you should kind of use them for certain things in your application. Again, API call should go into did mount. Did update can also have API calls if you need to make new API calls based on your input. And then will unmount should be used to clean up any resources. Again, timers are an easy example to kind of understand because they will run forever unless you tell them to stop. Questions, comments? Okay, let's proceed. So this is where we get to functional components. And this is the last portion of the lecture, so hopefully you guys are sticking with me. Functional-based components, again, everything we talked about up until now was for class-based components. All the lifecycle methods, kind of what the diagram we went through, that's for class-based components. However, functional-based components are definitely something we use often and should be able to do the same things as class-based components. And that's where use effect comes into play. So this is a hook that we've used before, we've seen before, but let's kind of actually talk about how use effect can mimic and accomplish the same things that we talked about for the three main functions that we were interested in. So just to highlight those, we want to talk about component did mount, component did update, and component will unmount. All right, so let's actually break this down. So first thing is component did mount. So if you want to mimic component did mount, there's two things you need to do. Or I guess one thing. Your dependency array should be an empty list. So notice this orange empty list right here. You need to pass that in. If you don't have that, you're going to get a little bit of different behavior. So you have use effect, you have an empty dependency list, and this do something is exactly what you'd put into your component did mount function if this were a class-based component. All right, so again, this is a function. We don't know what it's doing, but you guys can imagine whatever logic needs to be done. All right, so again, this is simulating or effectively doing the same thing as component did mount, but this is in a functional component way to do it via use effects. All right, so that's component did mount. If we want to do component did mount and component did update, notice we took away our dependency array. So now we don't actually have a dependency array. So basically any update from state or props will trigger this use effect and will do something in both cases. So again, the initial render will trigger do something, and then any future update will trigger this update also, and that's basically mimicking component did update. Okay, so let's move on with this. If you want to update based on a state, we would pass in my state as a dependency item to our dependency list. So in this case, my state is a state value I created for my function. Again, this is all function-based components. So I created a state called my state. Whenever my state changes, this will trigger this update because that's what the dependency list is saying. Additionally, the initial render will also call this. So this is actually mimicking component did mount, and it's mimicking component did update for whenever my state triggered the update. All right. Any questions? Hopefully I'm not losing you guys here. Expanding this on, so the things I've highlighted in green is another, this is how you want to achieve component did update for my state, but not component did mount. Okay, so going back one slide, component did mount is kind of like the default, as in you're going to call use effect no matter what. Even if you have a dependency list, it's going to call this on the initial render. So it's always going to do component did mount functionality additional to component did update. If you don't want to do the component did mount, you got to do something a little extra. It's not intuitive, kind of messy, but basically I'm creating a value called initial. I'm using ref. Again, ref is this magic thing that we've talked about, but not in detail. But this is you can use ref to kind of have a mutable value that exists between function calls. So in this case, initial will persist between function calls. So I'm going to set that initial value to true. And then on my first render, use effect is going to be called. But in that case, I'm going to set my initial value to false. Again, you got to use this .current property. I'm going to set that to false and simply return. And apologies for putting all of this on one line. I didn't have much real estate to work on with this slide. Basically, this if statement will be hit for the very first time that the render happens. It's going to set my initial value to false and then simply return. So it's not going to do anything in this use effect. Every other time this use effect is going to get called is when my state actually changes. So when my state changes, this will use effect will trigger, and the initial current value will be false. So it's going to basically ignore this if statement because the if condition is going to be false, and it's actually going to do something. So in this case, I'm mimicking component did update for whenever my state changes. Questions?
Question for you.
Yep, absolutely.
The dot current is because it's a property of a useRef variable.
Yeah. Again, useRef again is kind of magical. I'm going to point you to the docs. We're not going to go over it in detail, but useRef. The first case I showed you is kind of like the main use case where you can tie it to a control and then kind of grab the value of the control or do whatever you want by using the ref attribute of a HTML element. But in this case, you could also use ref to have mutable values. And this is from React documentation. So if I quickly Google it, I could prove it to you. React use ref. So this is actually something they suggest. It's not like a hacky way to do it, because if the documentation says to do it, that seems fine. So .current, all right. Yep, so however useRef is used for more than a ref attribute, it's handy for keeping any mutable value around, so you have instance fields and classes. So in class-based components, we could have an instance attribute, right? Because we could have the state that's tied to each instance. But in a functional world, we don't have that instance attribute ability. So that's where useRef kind of substitutes that behavior. So again, just read up more about it if you're curious about what you can achieve with useRef. But it is handy for multiple instances.
Yeah, the one thing that I was always told about useRef is useRef value changing won't cause a render.
Yep.
So if you needed to maintain some portion of state that you didn't want to cause a render, you could use a useRef.
Absolutely. Yep. So just to reiterate that, if you create a state value and then update it in this manner, it's going to trigger re-render. Ref values won't trigger re-render. So that gives you more control in that you don't always necessarily need to re-render if your ref value changes. But you could, if you want to change it, then you'd simply update your state or whatever needs to be updated, and that'll trigger your re-render for you. But again, this is kind of complicated, but this can achieve component did update without having component did mount functionality. All right, moving on. The last thing we want to talk about is component will unmount. So from your use effect function, again, we're creating a function here. This is fat arrow syntax. Hopefully you guys are pros at reading it. But we have this use effect. That function will also return a function that will do some cleanup work. So this will be called when the component is going to be unmounted. The key thing to note here is we went back to our empty dependency list. So empty dependency list will basically, the do something in this case will be your component did mount logic, and then whatever function you return will be your component will unmount logic. So again, this is where you do your cleanup, whether it be resources you're using, API calls, whatever you need to reset, you do in your cleanup. All right. The last thing is if you do have my state, or if you have something in your dependency list, this is actually going to run cleanup for every single my state update. And again, this might be desirable depending on your use case. So just be aware that this isn't going to mimic component will unmount if you do have a value in your dependency array. Again, you can have multiple use effects within the same functional component. So you can mimic as much behavior as you want with multiple use effects. You could have a separate one to mimic component will unmount, and then you could have a special one where you clean up resources for each my state update. Again, just comes down to what you're actually doing with your application. All right, so again, a lot of sample code there, a lot of maybe terminology, but hopefully you guys can kind of understand whatever you can do in a class-based component with lifecycle methods, you can, for the most part, mimic that within a function-based component, and the whole magic is done with use effect. It kind of condenses all three of those methods into one central place. But I will kind of argue I prefer the class-based components in this respect, where the methods are broken out into separate method names, so it's kind of clear when each is triggering, when each is kind of what each logic or which what each method is doing in terms of its logic. In this case, all of it's kind of bundled together. So it's, for me, it's a little harder to kind of piece it out. But I mean, that might be a benefit in that you get more condensed code. So you kind of argue either way if one is better over the other. All right, again, definitely throwing a lot at you guys. Key takeaways should be just understand the 3 main lifecycle methods, understand mounting, updating, and unmounting, and then the associated methods that get called in a class-based component, and just know that you can achieve the same functionality with useEffect in a functional-based component. It just gets a little trickier from my personal side of things, but it's definitely doable. All right. So we'll end it with a nice little meme. So again, a component mounts, updates, and eventually will unmount. And this is the circle of React components. Key thing that symbol is hinting here, read the docs. The docs will kind of give you clarity. You don't have to rely on your father, I guess, telling you all about React lifecycles or React component lifecycles. All right, and that will conclude our lecture here. So yeah, so that concludes our talk about React component lifecycles. We are going to go over new site 4, so let's do that after a short break. So I have 11:22 on my end. Let's take an 8-minute break, and we'll be back to tackle new site 4.